you are listening to the Kinetic Man Podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm David, and we want to walk with you on the journey to living a life defined by uncommon action that is full of purpose, adventure, and meaningful relationships. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours, and together achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to leave the potential life behind and become kinetic men.
What's up, everybody? This is Stu, and before we start this episode, you probably know that we don't really do any type of paid-for advertising on this podcast, but I do have a request. If you have been a listener of this show for a while and you enjoy these episodes and you get value out of it, could you tell somebody else that you think would enjoy the show as well and get value out of these episodes? And maybe even do a screenshot and post an episode that you've enjoyed on your social media platform of choice and tag us. We'd greatly appreciate that. The more people know about this, the more listeners we have, the more we can continue to just provide value to you and our listeners and bring in amazing guests and just have really, really cool conversations. So thanks again. Tell somebody about the podcast. Now go enjoy the show. See you. David, hello, sir.
What is up, my man? Hey, I'm torn if we should do either like a Canadian or maybe an East Coast accent to honor hockey, or if we should go more like up, double chuck, Southern, because you've come today with missing teeth, and I want to make sure I honor you in the in what it is, the look you're going for, and what you're really trying to put out to the world. So I want to honor you, my friend.
Hey, I was just coming to match Nathaniel because he just showed us that he's matching my style here. Yeah, buddy.
Nice.
I love it,
So
dude.
I'm actually the one
forgot
that's
mine at
left
home
out.
today. So
I'm the one that's left. I'm the
you are the one that's
guy.
left out.
Like I'm the oddball here.
Yeah.
Got
Yeah,
it.
you're
It's
the
good.
oddball
It's
here.
good that we level set.
It's funny because I actually got a text message this weekend from a mutual friend of ours who is still in the Navy, and he sent a picture of him missing a tooth. He's on an aircraft carrier right now out in the middle of the ocean, but he sent a text message and he lost a tooth as well. So all the cool kids are doing it these days, man.
Hey, man. You know what? I want to start this podcast by apologizing to you two
Thank you.
gentlemen. I am the one clearly on the outside, and so hey, let's get it.
Apology accepted. Nathaniel, welcome to the Connect Man podcast. It's good to have you, buddy.
Yeah, what an honor, you guys. Like, just to even be asked to come on here and be with you guys, whether I've got teeth or fake teeth or whatever it is, like it's part of the story. I'd love to hear how you lost yours. Mine's a pretty tragic, terrible story of being a lost, ridiculous young man. But just guys, great to be here, man. Excited and honored.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so we were connected through a mutual now friend. I'd call him a friend, even though I haven't met him in person yet, but I plan to at the end of this month, Michael Stewart. And we got on the phone call, and man, you just kind of laid out your story, and I was like, oh man, we got to have Nathaniel on our podcast because this is good. This is good. And I know that God's been working in your life a lot, and it's a really cool story. And so I just want to get into it, man. And maybe we can mix in, our loss of teeth at some point. But let's go back a little bit and give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you're doing now.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sounds great. Listen, and I kind of can get rambly, and so cut me off and ask questions and stop me. Man, I grew up in Virginia. Chaotic childhood. Looking backwards today, parents separated when I was really young. I don't really remember my mom. I always thought I was 3 or 4 when she left, but I found out later in life I was 7. So there's some missing pieces of the puzzle for me from a memory standpoint. What I learned later in life, it was pretty chaotic between my mom and dad. And I just remember being raised by my dad. Shortly after or before my mom left, I was molested a couple times by this old creepy neighbor. Never told anyone about that until years later. And my dad died suddenly when I was 15. So like right away, we've got some pretty big markers that affected me. I had no idea any of this stuff affected me. As a man today, I'm 47. And when I do these podcasts and talk about the restoration and the rescue of my heart from God, I've been able to go backwards and look at like what was really going on with me as a young man as it relates to those things, because I never dealt with them, and I tell people today I grew up with that, man, I was the scaredest kid in the room. And they're like, you, no way, and I'm like, bro, you have no idea. And I learned at a young age, my self-life, the self-reliant part of me somewhere like picked me up and said, hey man, the world's not safe, something's wrong with you, you're not okay, be what other people need you to be, and they'll either leave you alone or you'll get your way. And so this self life of manipulation or just kind of becoming a chameleon or whatever it needed to be, out of survival, out of strictly survival, and that posture of that I had no idea I had suited me for a very long time. It helped me. I had no relationship with God as a kid. And no one came alongside me to tell me my mom didn't leave because of me, and no one came alongside. Like my dad did the best he could. My dad was awesome. My dad's father died when my dad was like two or three, right? So he and then four or five other men come into his childhood, and my dad has seven brothers and sisters by all these other guys, as my dad really becomes the pseudo father of that family, and he provided for them. And that's what he did for me, and that's how I know he loved me, but he had no one to show him how to be a father. Right. And so I've learned this later in life. Um, and I know he loved me, but his way to show love was to take care of me. Like my house was the house to come over and have sleepovers. My dad was the cool bachelor. He was a factory worker. He had the full beard and chest hair in the 80s, wearing the short OP swim trunks at the pool with his like skinny boombox playing Mariah Carey, drinking Diet Cokes. Like what? Sitting back like this at the pool with wearing Ray-Bans. My dad drank, I think, before my mom left. He was an alcoholic. I don't ever remember him going to meetings, but he never drank from my memory up until when he died. But when he passed, my grandmother, his mom, took over custody, and she was ill-equipped to come in and take care of a 15-year-old boy because of the life she had led. Again, I have no context of this stuff back then. But my grandmother was a believer, and I truly believe she had faith in a relationship, but it was really toxic. My grandmother followed Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, which was this married couple. I think they've done documentaries on them, but they were kind of tip of the spear, prosperity gospel, golden recliners and helicopters and all that stuff. And so I went from never going to church outside of holidays to be with our grandmother to going to church multiple days a week. My grandmother telling about hellfire and brimstone and all this stuff. And I was a good kid. I was scared to death. I wasn't a bad kid. I was an athlete. I used to practice trying to be funny in front of the mirror so that I could go back to school and be the funny guy, because I saw that people liked the funny guy. And so I was a good kid, but she made me feel like I wasn't a good kid. And I saw the hypocrisy of the life she led. And I'm like, dude, if that's God, I'm out. Like she gave the majority of my father's life insurance to the church. It wasn't a big amount of money, but we were lower middle class family. I never wanted for nothing, but we didn't have a lot. And that money would have paid for college, right? And paid off my dad's house. And so I kind of just started building these resentments towards this, what I perceived as a broken system and a manipulative way to use God. And I now know that I associated my grandmother's brokenness to God, and that's not fair to God because it wasn't him, it was her. But anyway, man, I saw that and I was out. And so I'm like, how do I get out of this house? How do I graduate and just get away and figure life out, man? It's all up to me, right? And I don't necessarily remember making those conscious decisions, but I know that's what was driving me. And thank God I had wonderful friends and their parents come alongside me when my dad passed, and they kind of took me in as like a pseudo child. And as a matter of fact, like my best friends got accepted to Virginia Military Institute, and VMI wasn't on my radar. I was an athlete and was going to go to school for track and field, and had some other lines in the water. But for whatever reason, I think it was God working on my behalf without me even acknowledging Him. There was a seed planted for me. Maybe I should try VMI so I can stay close to those guys because they had really become my family, and I shouldn't have gotten into VMI. I didn't have the credentials. Athletically, I was gifted to get in there, and God got me into VMI, and so I left high school at 17, went to VMI, and got my butt kicked. Got my butt kicked. I was the last all male class at that school before they let the girls in, and I'm not a sexist or anything like that, but the single sex education model at VMI was there for a purpose because it was to break you down as an individual. You guys know this way better than most, to build us up as a team and a unit, right? And that's why the attrition rate was like 60% of our freshman class. They just wash out. Um, and that really set me up, man. It pushed me to the limit of certain things that I didn't know that I could do, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. In my senior year at VMI, I was going into the Air Force. I was going to be commissioned. Took my AFOQT and qualified pretty high for that. My senior year, I got a flyer on my desk in the barracks, and it was like MTV is going to be in Richmond, Virginia, taking auditions for The Real World. This is 97. And I think The Real World was the only reality show on TV back then. And it was like the thing. There was nothing bigger than The Real World back then. And there was nothing bigger than MTV. And I can remember looking at that going, like my story is effed up. Man, they cast effed up stories. Like, let me see, what can I do? And I had a semester before that, I'd been fortunate enough to go to an overseas program in the Czech Republic in Prague. My first plane flight ever was DC to London, London to Prague. I didn't even know where Prague was. I show up as this Virginia country boy in Eastern Europe in January, and no one speaks English. And I'm like, what is happening? And while I was there, it was incredible. Like, I had to learn Czechoslovakian, and I realized that, wow, there's way more than Virginia out here. I started dabbling with drugs in Europe and college as well, hallucinogens. And Dave Matthews was a big draw for us on the East Coast growing up. And he played like in Richmond, Virginia. He played the Flood Zone on Thursday or Wednesday nights. I can't remember, for 17-year-old kids in Charlottesville. And so I remember my first Dave Matthews concert in college was at Hampton, Sydney, at this thing called Greek Week. And a buddy of mine slipped me LSD and blew my mind open. Sorry to kind of backtrack there, but that began this kind of journey of trying drugs. And in Europe, we tried a lot of drugs. And it was fun. It was a blast. It was manageable. I tell you the Europe story because one day we were coming around the corner in Old Town Square, and Prague is one of the only cities that Hitler didn't bomb because he thought it was beautiful. So it's intact. It was nuts. In 97, I think they were 7 or 8 years out of communism. So it was pure and hardcore and beautiful. And we came onto this film set, and they were filming a motion picture called Les Miserables with Liam Neeson and Claire Danes. And it's like Claire Danes had just done Romeo and Juliet. So we're like, oh my God, hey, what's going on? And they're like, you're Americans. We're like, yes, we are. They're like, oh, so are we. Do you want to hang out? We're like, yes. So not Claire Danes or Liam Neeson, but the production team. And so we sat there. They were like, we're about to wrap set and be done for the night. Do you want to watch us film the last scene? And we're like, yeah, I'd never seen anything like this before. There were cranes and lights, and it was insane. We watched Claire Danes do this scene out of this window, and they said action. She said some words and said cut. And I was like, that's acting? Oh, dude, I'm in. Like, the bug was in, right? So that going, fast forward now back to VMI, and I see this MTV thing, and I never wanted to be on MTV, but I thought, how the heck could I ever become an actor? Oh, MTV could be a platform for me to get there because my story is screwed up. So anyway, so I step into those interviews for MTV, and over a 6-month period, get picked for the show. And overnight, My senior year at VMI, second semester, VMI lets me go. All good. VMI was all over the MTV special. They loved it. And we went and shot the show. Um, and it started airing 8 months later, whatever it was. And overnight, my life changed. I think I was telling you, Stu, like I was granted access, overnight for nothing. It was the most popular TV show in the world at that time. It aired in 97 countries. It was like you would think that we had done something special. You were immediately recognized by people wherever I went. People lost their mind about it as if we were a rock and roll band. And so I arrived, man, like overnight. I get back to VMI and I every day I get back from class, I had a semester to go, and I'd have message after message from HBO and CBS and MTV and all these things where people were asking, do you want to work? Do you want to try hosting? All these different things. And I can remember having sitting down and going, I got to go. If I'm going to do this, I got to go now. And it was, can I go VMI? Hey, what does it look like to renounce this? And is it possible? And I went and met with the commandant, and he was like, yeah, it was awesome. They were like, dude, we got such great publicity, and man, it's your choice. And I had one best friend who's my best friend to this day. He's my brother, and said, dude, don't do it. He's like, dude, you're going to fly. You potentially might fly. Like, don't do this. And I was so driven by the potential money, notoriety, and fame, like all these little things that I thought were success, arrival, whatever you want to fill in the blank, right? This insecure kid, all this backstory that we briefly talked about, getting access to this stuff. And I was like, F it, I'm out. And moved to New York, started working on multiple shows on MTV, got on a soap opera for a while, and got into movement studio. And we could talk about all that stuff forever. It was great. I loved it. And the drugs and alcohol kept building and all that. Like I can remember walking into a bar and being filled with a purpose. The minute I would recognize somebody recognized me, they knew who I was. And it was like probably similar to the way people feel when their posts are liked today, right? But times 100. And it just fed me, man. It fed this God-sized hole inside of me, and I loved it. And I kind of became this persona of this guy that was a partier, and I got booked to go around the country for a couple of years and go to colleges to answer questions about MTV, but really to party with the people at colleges, and it was just nuts. Movies, commercials, all that stuff, and all the while the drugs and alcohol were just part of it. You shoot a commercial for 2 or 3 days, and you make 60 to 70 grand over the course of a year from that commercial. You book a couple of those, like you're like really making money, and you've got all this downtime, and it just became normal. I tell people all the time, like Malibu Beach, Monday morning, Bloody Marys and cocaine was kind of like a thing because you gravitated towards these other either really successful people or trust fund people, just people that it wasn't a positive environment. I'm sure there were positive people around, but I didn't gyrate towards any of that stuff. And I say all that stuff about the notoriety, the fame, and I mean I toured with Willie Nelson and the Dixie Chicks for a year and a half, hosting and doing stand up comedy. I did all this neat stuff, um, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. I think you see a lot of people today that have reached the pinnacle of what the world would define as success, and they're starting to come out and go, "Hey, man, I'm empty, right? I'm empty. I've got everything the world has to offer, and I'm empty." And I just didn't see it. I didn't know it. The drugs and alcohol quieted this internal voice that I had no idea was there. That was like, "You're a piece of shit." Excuse my language. You're not enough. You've got to do this. They're not going to like you if they really knew. You can't ever tell anyone about X, Y, and Z. I was molested as an adult in the film and television business twice, and that's a different story. That it's a predatory business, right? And I believe God saved me from doing things that I was propositioned to do to get success. It's framed up as as everybody does this. If you're going to make it, you got to do this kind of thing. More so towards men in the modeling side of things, and the women is more on the acting side. But I mean, it's devious, and God rescued me from that, you know. But these experiences started to really compound on the past trauma of my childhood, you know, and I'm living in secret of all these things that I'm carrying around, and they're just chains. And I had chains like wrapped around me. I felt like I was like dragging weight behind me, and I don't know any of this stuff. Um, but the drugs and alcohol like would quiet any semblance of any of that inner monologue that was insecure, you know. And eventually the drugs and alcohol stop working too, you know, and that's where the abuse kicks in. And then all of a sudden you become chemically addicted. And in 2003, I was living in Venice Beach, California. My a friend, we lived in Venice Beach. Venice Beach is nuts, still nuts. We lived in a $2 million house next door, crack house, nice house, drug house, right? Like it's kind of, it's just like, but it's cool to live in Venice Beach because artists and all that kind of stuff. And my roommate came in one day and he goes, "Hey man, the guys on the corner are selling drugs." I'm like, obviously they're selling drugs. And he's like, "Oh, I got some. You want to try some?" I said, "What did you get?" And he's like, "Crack cocaine." I'm like, "Ew, gross." Meanwhile, I was a cocaine Cocosaurus, right? That was my thing. Like, that scare people. I do a big line of cocaine, like a gram of cocaine. And people are like, "This guy's heart's going to explode." I'm like, "That's nothing." I'm not trying to glorify that, but that was ridiculous. And I remember just like sneering at crack cocaine, like, "Oh, dude, that's for poor people." Um, about 20 minutes later, I go knock on his door. I'm like, "Hey, man, how's that crack cocaine?" Right? Like, tried it, and man, it was over. Was over. I had never had anything get me by the neck like that. Within a year, I stopped calling my agents, stopped meeting with directors. I mean, my career was there. Like I just shot a pilot, was getting another show that was getting developed. All the hard work I was performing with Second City out of LA, which is an improv group out of Chicago. Things were great. I was holding it together by a thread, and within a year, I was 145 pounds and had no money. Everything that I had acquired, I had traded or given away for the drugs. And I remember my girlfriend at the time caught me stealing from her again. Like within a year, I became a thief. I became a liar. I would wake up in the morning and be devastated that I did it again last night. And I can remember feeling the shame and the guilt, almost like just like 45-pound weights, just sticking right on my chest. And I would roll over out of bed and I would see the crack pipe or something on the side table. And immediately as that thought entered my mind, the shame went away, the guilt went away, and my mission was to go get crack cocaine. I had no choice to do it. It's bizarre how to explain it. So anyway, she caught me yet again stealing from her. I can't tell you how many times I did it. I don't even know. But she would get home from work and she worked at this bar, and I would take cash out of her purse and go smoke crack all night and get back in bed and act like I was asleep when she'd wake up in the morning. I mean, my last show I shot for MTV was in 2001 or something like that. Was the first challenge all the challenges that they have now. And I remember smoking crack for 2 days and not getting any sleep before the first day of filming. It was nuts. You can see it when you look at the pictures of me, you can tell. Um, and so she caught me and called my best friend that was living in Denver, the only guy that I was really close to. And she said, "Hey, he's got no money. I'm sick. I'm done with him. I'm kicking him out." And good
Is
for
this the
her,
same
you know.
guy,
And
the same dude from
they
VMI?
told me not to.
Yeah.
No, so he wasn't from VMI, but we grew up together.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
gotcha,
his
gotcha.
name's
He's the one that told you not to
yeah,
leave VMI. Yep, gotcha.
yeah. Not, don't do the real world. And I was crying, and he said, "You need a place to stay?" I said, "Yeah." He sent me a plane ticket. I flew to Colorado from LA in 2004, thinking that I just needed to get away from LA. Little did I know that I was the problem, not LA, you know. we quickly found that out. When I got to Denver, I blew it up. He got me a job in mortgages, which I was going to do for like a year, get healthy. In 2004, was like anybody could do a mortgage, as long as you had a heartbeat, and you made like really good money. And all of a sudden, I started making money, and I stole a guy's car from a party to go get crack cocaine and traded his iPod for it. Like, I mean, my best friend was like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, "Go to a meeting." I'm like, "What meeting?" He's like, "You need to go to AA." I'm like, "I'm not a addict." And I went to AA, went to NA, and they were talking about heroin, and I was like, "Thank God, these losers, I'm out of here." Like it's just like I'm like, I never did heroin, and that's just how lost I was, man. The next 11 years were the worst years of my life, man. I became evicted twice, homeless. Then I started going to AA, and that 11-year period, my desert, right, like God put three men in my life that were seed sowers that spoke about God in a way that just made me turn a little bit, just a little bit. I told Sue this, and I've told guys all the time. I really visually, I believe I built an armament of fortification around my heart, spiritually, emotionally, as a kid, and every incident that reinforced the lies that I'm not enough. It was another brick right on that fortification. And those guys spoke in a way that just kind of weakened it. It weakened the fortification that would eventually take me to the end of myself, or God would take me to the end of myself, to where I would seek Him. And the things I did in that 11-year period, man, are for another time, another place. I share those with people, but man, think about it. I did it. Man, the bar kept getting lower and lower and lower, and the shame and the guilt got heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier, and self-reliance, pulling yourself up to after spending the last dollar you had from the money that you got waiting tables, because I ended up having to wait tables because I couldn't keep a job. And in 2008, when the bottom dropped out, I remember I couldn't get a job doing anything except waiting tables. And I was still smoking. I was smoking crack again at this point in Colorado, and people would recognize me from the show. Um, and you could see it in their face, right? Like, whoa, oh man, I've been healthy, and I start to perform and act like I'm okay, and I say all that to make sense here. What happens next for me? I can't tell you the number of nights that I spent my last dollar. I can't tell you the number of nights that I manipulated my way into getting drugs and alcohol. I can't tell you the number of lies I told. I can't tell you the amount of shame and guilt that I carried of the things I did, compromising myself for the drugs and for the enslavement of what was happening to me. But I never considered suicide. Never. And I just can remember, like, it just wasn't a thing. I'm like, people are weak to do that. Like, wow, how I just wasn't a thing. I had every reason to do that. Like, and that'll make sense in a minute. 2015, I'm living up in the mountains. I've somehow manipulated my way up there. Like, I would get sober for a few weeks, a couple months, 4 weeks. I started going to AA in that 11-year period, and stuff made sense except the God piece. I'm like, man, y'all can have that. I'll try this other stuff. And I would piecemeal it, try, and I would get a little sleep, a little food in my belly, and man, the manipulator was back. I'd get myself a job. I'd figure I'd get a girlfriend, you know, uh, and I'd figure it out. And I'd make a little bit of money, and then I'd believe the lies that started to come in, like, man, that was a bad run, bud, but you're good, dude. You can have a beer. Yeah, beer was never a problem. I love cocaine. Or, hey, man, like, you've smoked weed forever and you're pretty high strung. Like, weed's pretty good, and like that'll chill you out. Yeah, I should have some weed. All these little things would happen, and I would relapse, 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 relapse. And so in 2015, I'd made my way up to the mountains of Colorado, was going back to college somehow, some way, and thought I'd become a EMT paramedic, flight paramedic, like all this grandiose BS in my mind. And I was living with people in recovery, and I was going to meetings, and I was like telling people I was sober. Secretly, had figured a way to take enough Adderall here and there to drink a little bit of take shots here and there to like appease this beast inside. There was this like beast inside of me that was so hungry for any kind of drug or alcohol. And I went out one of those nights and I got pulled over. It was my third DUI. And they take me to jail, and I'm sitting in jail, and it the beginning of my life began really in that jail cell. I believe God came into that jail cell, and I've recently started to realize this. I believe that God allowed the spirit of death to enter that jail cell with me. Because as I sat there with hands in my head, I can tell you everything about this jail cell. How do I explain to my roommates that are in recovery, right? Like that I didn't come home. I could say, I just remember kind of trying to manipulate and think my way through it. And it was like this darkness came over me, and I was ready to kill myself. I can't explain it. I don't know any other way to explain it except I feel like God pulled the curtain back. And if I kept going, then I was going to kill myself. Didn't have a plan, none of that, but I knew it was going to happen. It was for certain. It was a thing. It came over me. It made sense. Like what? Like out of nowhere, it just made sense. And I say that today because like I've had so many guys, friends kill themselves. I'm sure you guys have as well. And they're guys, some of the guys are like, man, how the heck? Like this dude, no way. And some of it is there's a mental health component to this in a big time way. I found that out through the last 10 years of my life working in mental health and all that. But there's also a spiritual component that I don't think anybody's talking about. And that spiritual component is the spirit of death that comes in. And one day, suicide had never been a part of my life. And out of nowhere, one day, not only was it a part of my life, but it was plausible and it made sense. Like, that's nuts. And I can remember being scared in that moment more than I ever been about any consequences. I'd lost everything financially so many times, relationally, all this stuff. And I was facing jail, like I'm not really ready for that. So I remember getting on my knees in that jail cell, and I've told this story many times. And I just said, "Hey God, I don't know if you're real, and if you are, you probably want nothing to do with me because I'm a piece of shit." And that was the first honest thing I think I ever said to God, because I believe that the evidence was overwhelming that I was. I said, "But I don't want to kill myself, and I don't know what to do. Would you please help me?" And that began this journey. The next 10 years, God gave me an opportunity later that morning to do something different in a very cathartic, Holy Spirit way. I heard God's voice, not audibly, but in my heart for the first time in my life later that morning, when I was leaning back into self-reliance yet again after making this like true statement of surrender to God, and in the chaos of the cascading like manipulative thoughts of how to get out of this yet again, I heard this my voice, but it was different, and it just said, "Man, ask for help." And I had people around me that I could ask for help, and God had placed those people around me, and that began this journey, that I'm on today. I've never had a drink since. God has removed the desire for me to drink. I went right back to AA immediately, and jumped all in, and even with the God thing, and the last 10 years has been me getting to know Jesus and learning to go backwards into my story with professionals and community and great men. And I was forced into vulnerability. Vulnerability has saved my life. Most men don't understand that because they can hide on the sidelines of the things that they're quote unquote in recovery from, because we're all in recovery. People just don't know it. But the drugs and alcohol, man, push the limit to me. And if I didn't get vulnerable, I was going to kill myself. And so that's led me to where I am today.
Man, that is crazy. And just for context, what was the year of the jail cell get on your knees incident? What year was that?
Yeah, early 2015. So 9.5 years ago.
Okay. So that was the culmination of that 11 years of just from like 2003 period to 15.
2004. Yeah. Yeah, and I was in Colorado that whole time.
Okay. And did you, I'm just curious, you alluded to it, but what was the opportunity that the next morning, what happened there?
Yeah. Um, so Vail, Colorado, if you've ever been, is this kind of Disneyland off the highway in the mountains where people go skiing. Well, if you live up there, you don't live Disneyland. You live a little bit down valley. And the county that Vail is in is called Eagle County. And so Eagle County is like 30 miles away, 20 some miles, I can't remember. And the courthouse is in Eagle. So I say all this because if you are you only go to Eagle for a couple things if you live in Vail. You go there if you're lucky enough to fly out of the Eagle airport. There's a killer barbecue place there that everybody goes to, and there's great mountain biking. And the courthouse is there. So when you get in trouble in Vail, you go to Eagle, and everybody gets in trouble in Vail because it's an adult Disneyland for drinking and drugs. And so I'm in Eagle in jail. And again, I told you guys I'd been going to AA for a number of years up in the mountains, man. And I was all in for various periods, and I kept relapsing and the shame of that just kept driving me kind of away from it. But then I would fight back because I had made some good friends, in AA. And one of them in particular, his name's Devin. And he was just like, he would have been a guy I would have been a buddy with outside of AA. And he had this ridiculous car. He's into cars at the time, and he had us like a two-door Subaru in the mountains, right? And it was like had one of those stupid mufflers on it, like. And so whenever Devin was around town or coming over, you'd hear him coming, right? Obnoxious, tinted windows, kind of low to the ground, stupid car. And sorry if that's your car, Stu.
Yeah,
And
dude, totally. I could totally
No,
see Stu rocking
definitely
around
not.
with
I have the exact
uh,
opposite. A huge truck.
awesome, dude. So and so anyway, Eagle County, the courthouse is down this road that dead ends at the courthouse. It's like a mile and a half, 2 mile road, and I'm walking out of jail that morning. First of all, the cops come into the jail cell however many hours later after me making this commitment to God, and they shackle me, right? And we'll talk about walking in shackles, man. We could have another podcast on what that does to you. And I can remember shuffling my feet and my hands, just thinking of how far I had fallen, how many steps I had hit along the way. I go in front of the judge, and she's like, "Mr. Blackburn, you're in serious trouble, third DUI, felony." I said, "Yes, ma'am, I know." She said, "You know what, though? I feel like I need to let you go this morning." I said, "What do you mean let me go?" And she says, "We'll let you go on a personal recognizance bond." I said, "I'm not sure what that is." And she goes, "You don't have to post bail. I'm just going to trust Mr. Blackburn. You're going to do the right thing and come back here." And I just remember kind of being like, "Oh, okay." And obviously I wanted to come back there. I didn't want to go to jail, but I was released, and I start walking from the jail down this road. I got to get to the roundabout to take the bus back to Vail to get my car out of the 7-Eleven parking lot. I got to call my roommates. How do I? And I remember walking, and I've forgotten all about this until I was on a retreat some years ago. And God brought this memory back to me that would end up becoming part of what I do today in the retreats and stuff that we do. And I can remember walking down this road, and he took me back to this memory, and it was as if I was like in a plane looking down at myself walk on this road. And I remember exactly what I was thinking. I was like, okay, I can say I met a girl, easy. I don't have to work today. That's good. I'm not in trouble with that. Like, I can just remember going through the checklist of doing what I've done my whole life. And out of nowhere, I hear bang, 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 is Devin. He should never have been on that road at 7 something in the morning on a Wednesday. And I froze. I froze in that moment. And I'm looking at where can I hide? And I can remember going like, I got to hide. I can't see me. If you see me, then cat's out the back. And I just felt like this anxiety. And I heard it. I heard it, man. It was a split second of time that felt like 10 minutes, right? Where I'm just ask for help. And it was so different. It was so unique in its tone. Before I could manipulate or argue against it, I walked out into the middle of the road and I just started waving my hands. And so he was coming my way anyway. And he pulled up next to me and he was like, "What? Oh, well, my God, you did it again." And I'm like, "I'm a liar. I'm such a piece of shit. Like, I need help, you know." And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of learning. I didn't know this at the time, but like learning to hear the Holy Spirit, man. Like, how many split second opportunities do we have throughout the day? Man, they're enormous. Like when I come home and my wife's got the thermostat at 70 and it's not that hot outside, and I'm like, "Oh, what's she doing?" Like, if I don't understand why that frustrates me in that moment, then I can't hear the Holy Spirit and I go cause chaos. What are you doing? Don't you know it's expensive? And like, I've done work with God and with other men to understand that I've got a massive fear of not having enough, right? And fear that I'm not going to be taken care of. And so when my wife turns the thermostat down because she's hot, no big deal. I feel like if I'm not careful and I don't hear the Holy Spirit in that split second, then I'm going to go cause damage. And so I started, fast forward to today, I understand that. But back then, that was the first time that God kind of had put that vernacular on my heart to hear him. And so I heard him that day, and it's me, but, heard the encouragement that day and walked out into the road.
Dude, I love that, man. I love hearing a story of just of that where you just let go and like something comes over you. You're in the darkest, deepest spot, and something comes over you to make a different decision, right? It's and not everyone will take the leap. Not everyone will actually like listen and take action on it. Um, but somehow you did. There's a there's something that there's a lot. I think we need to have a part two. Can we have a part two to this? Because man, this is
I'd be
this
happy to do it with you guys.
yeah, dude. Because we're not even like we need. I want to get into like a lot more stuff too, and we're gonna run out of
Yeah.
time today.
When I
Uh,
and I still have
I'm
questions
ha-
about I still have questions that I want to revisit before we
yeah.
move on. So
well, yeah,
Okay.
look, man, we can
do
do.
you have another hour? That's my question. Do you have
Yeah.
another hour? Because ours just freed up.
Yes.
Okay, then
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
on because
Well, and I
there's
want
some
to say something
things.
too. So, Stu, you said a lot of people don't move towards that
Mm,
if they hear it. I thought I chose God that day for a very long time. I thought I made the choice to move towards Him. And what I'm learning, and this is a debate for theological giants above my pay grade, and I don't want to get into all that, but I believe God gave me the desire to choose Him,
mm,
which is crazy. Uh, some of us continue to rebuke him, right? And I don't know how long that lasts before God's patience wears out. I don't know if he has patience or the grace, but good news, bad news. Like if you're listening to this podcast and you have felt God pursue you and you've yet to stop and listen, good news is he's pursuing you, but the bad news is he's pursuing you too. Like, you can't run that fast. And the sooner you slow down and say yes, the sooner your life's going to change. That's all I'm saying.
mm. A key phrase word there that might give someone to pause to stop is when you choose to slow down and listen. I think a lot of people don't do that.
That's why we built the ministry that we built, because we're overwhelmed with the chaos of this world and the to-do lists, and the noise is so loud that we don't hear God. Period. He's always speaking to us. We just don't hear him.
Mm, it's good. And one thing I want to backtrack on a little bit, and this has been a discussion point inside our men's mastermind group, is this theme of shame. And I went back through my notes in my notebook here and I wrote it down from a discussion that we had. I'm not going to name names, but one of the men inside their group said this and it was really powerful at the moment. I think it's powerful here now. And I'd like to kind of dive into it a little bit. He said, shame is a powerful force that makes you do things you don't even know that you're doing. And you had mentioned shame and really not even understanding what you're doing because of shame. I think a lot of men specifically have a lot of shame in their lives and they don't know what they're doing because of shame. Could you kind of touch on that from your perspective and how that's impacted your life? And maybe now looking back and reflecting on it, like how did shame impact the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. You don't, I think the hardest part is I didn't know that shame was driving any of it.
Yeah.
Um, because when I would recognize it was hard to lower the bar morally in the beginning, right? To do the things I did. I was a good kid. Before any of this stuff happened, I wasn't a guy that lied. I wasn't a guy that, like manipulated to get things. I was a guy that a young, sweet kid. That's what my people tell me and what I kind of remember being, and over time, it's kind of like I would you turn the corner of a situation in my life and there would be a spirit of darkness waiting. And as I went around that corner, he'd put a wet blanket on my shoulders. And I never know it was put on my shoulders. And so the weight just starts to stack up, right? And I only know this now in retrospect, right? Because of God's rescue and me saying yes. So like it's a great story to tell people right now, and it's entertaining to listen to of how God literally took me to the end of myself for me to say yes to him. Um, but the real work began after that, like saying yes and then continuing to say yes and having men around me that called me out on saying yes and encouraged me into saying yes and stepping into this vulnerability that everything in you says no. And in that vulnerability, you kind of step into this room that you don't even know exists. And when you do, you go, oh, wait a minute, man, the furniture in here is nice. It is safe. The temperature's good. Wait, well, that chair looks a little scary. You kind of get into this room, and in that room with other people, you start to look backwards and go, oh my gosh. Okay, so I made that decision because I was so shameful that if you saw this, then that, right? Fill in all those blanks for yourself. But you got to be able to do the work with other people to go backwards. Listen, my story is not the majority. My story is the minority. And a lot of guys listening to this right now are going like, man, that story's crazy, man. My parents are still together, or fill in the blank, dot, dot, dot. I was never molested. I don't have trauma, but BS. Everybody listening to this podcast has trauma. The world has framed trauma up as this thing where it's this massive, like critical gaping wound. Man, there's all kinds of little trauma, and they build up and relatively cause the same damage as some of those big things that happened to me. So if you're listening to this, and especially if you're a believer and you believe what the Bible says, here's the deal: you've been raised, mothered, fathered, in relationship, taught, coached, and in friendship with broken people. Those broken people have dropped the ball. You have dropped the ball. In dropping the ball, we're hurt. Those hurts add up. And in those hurts, the enemy enters in, the world enters in and says, hey, Nathaniel, something's wrong with you. Mom left. Hey, Nathaniel, and you can't tell anybody about being molested. They'll think you're gay. Right? Whatever the lies are that fill that space. And so everybody, we need to have men in our life that are safe, that we can go to and go, I don't know what this vulnerability thing is, but man, it sounds like there's some real freedom. Abide in me and I in you. Right. And so going into God, into the vine in relationship, you start to identify shame. You start to identify guilt, these two different things that are opposing us and trying to stop us in our tracks. And until you do that work that it takes to go backwards and look at, man, my dad, this is a hypothetical, but a lot of guys, fathers work a ton because they have to. Man, you got to provide. That's a good thing. But it's not a good thing if your father works all the time and he doesn't tell you that he loves you. His actions, because he's providing for you, tells you that he loves you. But has your dad ever told you, like, son, I love you? Hey, son, you're enough. Man, hey, son, you've got what it takes. Every little boy needs that from the man in his life. And if that hasn't happened, you got way bigger trauma than you think, right? And so even with my dad, who was a provider, and I know he loved me, my dad never told me he loved me. He told me the day he died, he loved me. I remember that. I was challenged by this guy named John Eldridge, who has become a great ally in my life and a mentor. And he asked, he says, man, Nathaniel, when did you ever tell you he loved you? And I can remember sitting there going, oh, man, are you trying to like tear down my dad? My dad was awesome, And it's like, no, man, it's just, but Nathaniel, did he tell you he loved you? And I had to think about it. And then I remember the day he died, like it was awkward. He told me he loved me. And I remember being a 15-year-old kid, like going, oh, yeah, of course, I love you too, Dad. And that was the last thing I ever said to him, and then he died later that day. Man, I carried the guilt of that and shame of that for years, not even knowing that I had guilt and shame around that. I was just being a 15-year-old kid, you know, but it matters, and John and other men, right? Like we're talking about having good men in your life that have no skin in the game other than that they love you. That is the key. Because otherwise, if you're like me, I'm not going to trust these guys. I got to be able to trust the men around me that what they're saying is good and true and led by God, because a lot of times it directly conflicts what's going on up here, because my wiring is so messed up from the world view, from whatever content I'm putting in my head, from my past experiences and all that stuff. And so it's good to be in community to hear these things. Um, and so one thing I've learned is that had I not done that work with John about my dad, what do you think I would have done to show my kids I loved them? I'd have provided, but I wouldn't have known to say, hey, son, I love you. Hey, honey, I love you. Man, I have 2.5-year-old twins, boy, girl. I tell them I love them 40 times a day. I want to break that generational sin, that has happened. That's not my dad's fault, but it's real. And so I hope I'm answering the question, and where God's kind of taking me through this is that, man, we're all hurt, we're all wounded. The wounds don't need to look the same, but they all matter. They all matter. And so to go into that and go backwards, man, therapist, good group of friends, pastor, community group of guys, right? If you need help with that, there's so many outlets to figure it out. But then start to identify, hey, where is shame in my life? What does shame look like? What is shame saying to me? Right? We talk to ourselves more than anybody else throughout the day. How are you talking to yourself? Man, most guys talk to themselves terribly, right? It's this doubtful, no, you can't, oh, you shouldn't, if this, then that conversation. Or the other end of it, right? Like super prideful and above the fray. But we got to go inward and figure that stuff out, because once you identify how shame enters, how guilt enters, you then, through the Holy Spirit, in these split seconds that like we're talking about, you're able to combat it and go, wait a minute. Like, I'm going out to dinner with my wife and a couple, and I don't know this guy. And if I'm not careful going into it, my internal monologue is like, oh God, I gotta go be nice to this guy. I gotta listen to who this dude is. And man, but my wife, right? Or hey, man, I need to really impress this guy because I want him to like me. Or hey, I think he could be a good friend. Or hey, maybe this would be a good contact for what we're doing. Like, I got to be careful of how my motives are in there going into the situation, because they're all backed by this deep, deep core lie about me. That's, Nathaniel, you are not enough. And that one lie sends me in every direction. And if I'm not careful, even today, because I'm still a broken mess of a man in process that is in this human, broken, stupid body. And in the sanctification process of being fine tuned by God, if I so choose to be in that process, which is hard in and of itself, he's whittling away and continuing to show us like how selfish and self-centered we are, because we are. And also how I can be driven by shame and guilt, and so you got to identify those ways that shame and guilt show up with you. And it's not easy, but it's not hard.
Yeah, I love there's two things that kind of come to mind as you were talking. And one is normalizing certain things and how it just becomes a new standard. And I'm like you, and I tell my kids, I mean, I hug and kiss those babies and tell them I love them. Like, and we have games that we play. Like, I'll fake yell at them and be like, Jacob, just in the middle of nothing. And now, they used to be like, oh, yes, Dad. I'm like, I love you, buddy. But now I'm like, Jacob. And he's like, I love you too, Dad. And it does, like, and I say Jacob because he's the one I noted this weekend as we went camping. I say Jacob about 1,000 times a day because he's just that kid. But all my kids, like, just really just having it be very normalized that there is a man who's attempting to be emotionally mature and love on them, my two boys and my daughter, and that it's healthy and what it looks like. So you highlighted that, and I love that. But then you also point out, a lot of us think that when we turn to Jesus or when we overcome a thing, that it's gone, right? That, oh no, I'm healed of that. But the fact of the matter is and Paul highlights, right? There's very few men in the history of the world that were as influential and did more to to progress the word of God than Paul. But he often highlights, the thorn in my flesh and why do I do the things I don't want to do, and there's a lot of that, and it just reinforces the fact that our work is continuous and constant. And one of the things that you said that I want to go back to, that really just the word picture intrigued me, but you also experienced it very tangibly, is this idea of the chains and the shackles. And you were carrying the weight of the chains, and you were shackled, and you said, and I'm just curious what you were alluding to, but you said when you were physically shackled, it did something. There was a very real experience there, and it forced you, to think certain thoughts. Or I'm curious what that. Can you help us? Help me understand what that physically, because oftentimes I think, and I think a lot of us men, a lot of times I feel the weight of the chains and the shackles of my sin and of my past, and the worry of my future in those same shackles.
Yeah. Oh man. Great question. Yeah. It all goes back to relationship, man. Like in relationship with Jesus. In relationship with Jesus. Um, Jesus has this incredibly profound power to break the chains. Like he is the chain breaker, right? Um, I when I got sober, recovery, man, is all about God and faith. One of the biggest things that recovery talks about is resentment. And a lot of the chains that we carry are born out of resentment of self, resentment of things that have happened to us, things that we've done, right? And those, in confessing that resentment and in doing some work around those chains and looking at my part in those chains, because I have a part in every bit of the shackles that are in my life, and confessing that stuff, it's as if God or Jesus comes in. I love Harry Potter. I own it, man. I love Harry Potter. I used to say that I had this, my magic wand that was, to break resentment, break the chains, and like every time I would recognize one of these chains or the fear of, right, fear is a big driver for every man in all kinds of facets. And fear, if you flip the script on the enemy, right, flip the script on the enemy is by working through our fear. Right? I can look at, hey, how come I have a fear? If I notice a fear's showing up in my life, and then I go, okay, wait a minute, okay, God, what's going on with this fear? How come I have it? That fear will typically lead me to a lie about myself. In that lie, I'm able to go, wait a minute, where'd that lie come from? I can then identify some woundedness of my past potentially, but I can also then take that wand and go right up against that lie and say, no, 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 that's not true. Right. And I can break the chains of resentment to prevent more chains from forming. You got to go through and go backwards in your life, like we've been talking about, to recognize what your chains are, right? And the heaviness. And so I say all that to do that work to identify it. And then you said, but we are walking around with the weight of the world and the stress on our shoulders, right? And all these different things that we need to do or should do. And what I started to say in the beginning of this was in relationship with Jesus. So only in relationship with Jesus, conscious contact, nobody does this thing perfect. I F it up all the time. I'm terrible at it. I'm shameful, but God shows me before the shame comes in, like, hey, son, you're doing better today than you did yesterday, right? No one will ever do the same perfect. But in relationship is where God starts to show me that I have chains. Why am I so why is that specific thing weighing me down so much? There's a why behind all of this stuff. And we settle way too much for the surface level answer on this stuff. We don't go deep enough to go, yeah, but what's the why behind it? Right? Like my wife is wonderful, but she wears me out on certain things. How come? Like the things she's doing aren't like nefarious in nature, right? But why the heck do they twist me up? That's the more important question rather than, man, she should do X, Y, and Z. No, I need to figure out and go, hey, how come when she does X, Y, and Z, I'm spun up? Die to self is the hardest thing on the planet to do. But in relationship with God, like very imperfectly and other dudes, we start to see. It's like Neo, man, when he's on the top of that building, then that agent comes out with that gun and just starts unloading that clip at Neo in the Matrix. And Neo bends backwards, right? And he like dodges those bullets and the girl says to Morpheus, what's happening? And Morpheus, he's starting to believe. Like you start to see it. Like we literally live in a matrix, in a world that is broken biblically, that God allows it to be this way. The prince of this world, right, in a supernatural way, is the devil. Like that is legit. Like I love Lord of the Rings, I love all these crazy fun movies, but we literally live in that movie. And we have forgotten that we live in this insane story, that there are angels and demons and disembodied supernatural stuff going on all around us. We miss it because the world is so loud right now. What is it? Kaiser Sose, the greatest trick the devil ever performed was convincing people he wasn't real. Hello. We live in a satanic lullaby in the West right now that like family systems, God, all this stuff is just being pushed away. We live in a supernatural world. And so that matrix is coming at us from all different angles. And if you don't know yourself, if you don't understand what's going on underneath, if you don't know what that chain is behind you being pulled and what's at the end of it, you're screwed. You're just going to go to sleep and you're going to yell at your wife and you're going to show up Sunday to church and say everything's cool, or you're going to stay addicted to pornography on the sidelines and you're going to miss it. Like we're the gift of this relationship with Jesus is to live free, very imperfectly. Most men don't do it because it's hard. Like as I stay in relationship with Jesus, guess what he changes? The desires of my heart. Man, masturbation, like early on in my marriage was like my other friends who were believers were like, oh man, masturbation is so hard for me. I'm like, God, it sucks for you. Like masturbation is great. Like, why is that a bad thing? And I didn't understand why it was a bad thing. Uh, and then I started to pray about it as I was advised by some of the men in my life that I trust, that we've been talking about, that have no skin in the game other than that they love me. Hey, man, why don't you ask God about that masturbation and start praying about it? I start praying about it. Guess what? I start getting convicted about it. I start to understand about it. And now, guess what? Now I got a battle. What's the battle? Am I going to give in to the desires of my flesh? Well, how come I have those desires? Right? Where does that all come from? And so in relationship is the only way that I can begin to identify the chains, understand the how come behind the chains, and in community with guys be held accountable, right, to that stuff, and limp through life and pick each other up in our successes and move forward, man. This thing is the reason I got called into ministry was because I started to see the majority of men are asleep at the wheel. Sorry. I, Guess what? I fall asleep at the wheel too, and I do this professionally for my life now in ministry. Most men that say they're believers uh, show up to church. They're probably not present at church. They check a box by doing a devotional, sitting on the toilet in the morning, right? To hurry up and get to my fantasy football score. I do it, right? And they check this box. And the lie is that they're in a relationship. You're not in a relationship. How could you be? You don't spend time in prayer. You're not spending time asking God about things. The question that we're going to talk about later at the end of the podcast. This is the answer. It's in relationship. Do I start to see this stuff? So anyway, man, I feel like I'm preaching. I'm not a preacher. And get off the soapbox. Sorry.
Well,
I'm just fired up about this stuff, man.
dude, I
Like
love it.
this is,
This is why
dude, because this
we
is
gotta.
it.
This is it.
But this
This
is
is it,
it.
man.
This is it. People got to wake up, man. You're missing out on what it is to walk with Jesus. It's nuts. Like the moments that he comes in and embraces you, and you feel the love of God. When I wept for the first time, and I mean wept, because he started to show me the trauma and the hurt, and like I never cried at my dad's funeral. I never cried about anything as a kid. I went to VMI, and you had to be a badass. You had to be tough and be a tough guy. Like they do all these different things. Like I never mourned or grieved the innocence that was lost in my life. Right. When I did, holy smokes, there's not a drug, there's not a woman, there's not a toy, there's nothing that will ever come close to the feeling I felt when I wept with God. Right. And that feeling that you guys know that you have in relationship with God, man. Like if guys, this is so hard, and because it's hard, guys don't do it. But if we could stand up and we can ignite our friends in our little nuclear circles to start praying for awareness. Holy Spirit, speak to me about my resentment, speak to me about my shame, speak to me about my guilt. Show me how come I'm so frustrated at my wife when she does X, Y, and Z. Show me how come I'm so passive with my wife when she does X, Y, and Z. We are the ones that are supposed to take the lead here. We are the ones that are supposed to lead our families. We are the ones that are supposed to lead our children. We can't do that if we're not in relationship with God. To our own devices, we suck. Period. And so, guys, wake up, man. And like, if there's any way that I can help in that process, please let me know. I am not the agent of change, man. God is, but dude, the freedom that comes from being in relationship outweighs the difficulty it is to be in relationship.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, we're already over our book time slot. We're gonna call this part one because I want to do part two for sure. We want to dig in more to True North Retreats, what you're doing now. But just for part one of this, can you just give a quick overview of fast forwarding to where you are now? What is True North Retreats, and why did you start it? Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Stu. Hey, we're going to stop here for part one. Nathaniel's answer to that last question is really good, and that's going to work. We're going to pick up in part two next week. So, in the meantime, you can go to truenorthretreats.org and check out what Nathaniel's doing. Next week, we're going to talk about that whole transition to that business and restoring the heart. It's going to be really good. I can't wait for you guys to listen in. Go have an amazing day. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Connect Man podcast. If you are growth-minded, community-focused, and willing to take uncommon action to redefine success and live an abundant life, visit our website at www.thekineticman.com to see all the ways we could connect.
And on our website, you can find more information on everything we're doing, like joining our meetup page to get the details on our webinars and our local Thursday gatherings here in Colorado. From our site, you can also find more information on and sign up for the next Kinetic Man retreat and the next house of our mastermind group. Finally, we always appreciate your love and support. Please share this episode and go rate us on your favorite podcast player of choice.
Thank you again. Now go take uncommon action.